She had never been stood up before, not because she'd always been lucky, but because she'd stopped believing she deserved to try. Tonight she'd broken her own rule, and for that, the universe had rewarded her with a single, glowing text. Sorry, not coming. Good luck. Claire stared at the message until the words blurred, her reflection trembling across the restaurant's polished screen. Around her, the room shimmered with laughter and soft music. Candlelight caught the edges of wine glasses, flickered across faces in love. But at the table by the window, hers was the only one left empty. She pressed her thumb against the phone screen, hoping pressure could erase humiliation. A waiter passed with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. She nodded back, pretending to scroll, pretending she wasn't a woman who had skipped 2 meals that week just to afford a dress that didn't look secondhand. The glass of water on her table wobbled when her hand shook. Across the room, a man noticed. He hadn't meant to. He wasn't the kind who usually noticed strangers at all. But something about the way she sat, rigid with dignity, the kind of quiet heartbreak that didn't need tears to exist, tugged at something half buried in him. Michael Reed had come here to wait for a business partner, a man who was, as usual, late. He'd spent the last 10 years negotiating with people who measured worth in numbers. Yet in that moment, the only thing that caught his attention was the woman clutching her purse like a lifeline. He watched her start to stand, coat half off the chair, eyes fixed on the exit. She was going to leave, maybe even before her humiliation could finish settling. And he couldn't explain why, but he couldn't let her go like that. He rose, crossed the few tables between them, and stopped beside her before she could take a step. "You shouldn't go home on an empty stomach," he said. His tone was measured, not invasive, the voice of someone who had spoken too little and thought too much. Claire froze, eyes darting up. He was tall, dressed in quiet wealth, charcoal suit, no tie, sleeves rolled like he'd wanted to escape formality, but hadn't quite succeeded. "Excuse me." He gestured to the empty chair opposite hers. "Just dinner, nothing more. I'll sit with you. If you'd rather, I'll leave as soon as you finish." Her brows knit. "Why?" "Because no one deserves to be left alone at a table that was meant for 2. The sentence landed like something sacred, and for a second she hated that it did. She hesitated long enough for the moment to feel awkward, then finally exhaled and sank back into her seat. "1 meal," she said quietly. "Then we forget this happened." He smiled faintly. "Agreed." When the waiter returned, she ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, the soup of the day. Michael ordered the same before she could protest. His voice carried the unspoken reassurance of someone who knew what it meant to protect another person's pride. Silence lingered as the waiter left. The low hum of other diners pressed around them like a reminder that the world kept spinning for everyone else. "You look like you've had a rough evening," Michael said gently. Claire gave a short laugh that wasn't really one. "I look like someone who believed a text promising coffee was worth mascara." He studied her expression. "And it wasn't?" She shook her head, a bitter smile ghosting her lips. "Apparently not." The soup arrived, steam rising between them, fogging the fragile air of strangers forced into accidental honesty. Claire cupped the bowl in both hands. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know," he said, meeting her eyes. "But I remember what it felt like to sit where you are." That stopped her. "You?" He nodded. "Different story, same table." His voice carried the tone of a man who'd learned what loneliness looked like, even in a crowd. Claire wanted to ask, but didn't. Some silences were safer kept. Instead, she said quietly, "Then I'm sorry, whoever she was." Michael's lips curved, not quite into a smile. "I'm not. It made me see people differently. It made me notice." Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady. Drops trailed down the glass beside them like faint silver threads. The restaurant manager approached then, all polished professionalism. "I apologize," he said smoothly, turning to Claire, "but this table is reserved for later." His voice held that careful tone reserved for people assumed to be replaceable. Before Claire could rise, Michael spoke. "She's with me. We'll stay as long as we please." Recognition hit the manager like a jolt. His smile changed instantly. "Of course, Mr. Reed. My apologies." Claire blinked. The name echoed somewhere in her mind. Headlines, skyscrapers, corporate scandals. Reed. Her stomach tightened. Michael Reed, she said slowly, tasting the words like disbelief. He inclined his head slightly. Does it change anything? She stared at him. You're a billionaire. You could buy this restaurant. I could, he said simply, but tonight I'd rather share a bowl of soup. Something in her chest constricted. It wasn't flattery. It was disarming in its normalcy. But normalcy was exactly what terrified her. I thought you were just someone who understood, she said quietly, voice breaking. Not someone playing savior. He flinched. That's not what this is. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping against the tile. It doesn't matter. I shouldn't be here. Michael didn't move to stop her, only said, Then don't let my name or a bad text decide your worth tonight. His words followed her like an echo as she hurried out into the rain. The cold hit her immediately, rain slicing down her coat, her shoes soaking through in seconds. She ran toward the subway entrance, clutching her purse, the last $5 in it, her only safety net. But when she reached the stairs, the screen above flashed its indifference. Last train departed. She stared, chest heaving, throat tight. The city didn't care who you were. It rained on everyone the same. Then from behind her, a shadow moved. A black umbrella tilted over her head, sheltering her from the downpour. Michael stood beside her, hair damp, shoulders wet, but eyes calm. You'll freeze out here, he said quietly. Let me walk you home. Claire didn't answer. Pride wanted to say no. Loneliness whispered otherwise. Finally, she stepped into the circle of his umbrella. They walked in silence. Two strangers under the same fragile shelter, the rain their only witness. The umbrella was small, but the silence beneath it was enormous. Rain hammered against the thin fabric like applause from an audience that didn't care who won. Claire walked just inside the circle of dry, her arms crossed tight against her chest, eyes fixed on the glistening sidewalk. Michael held the handle steady, the tilt angled more toward her than himself. The left side of his coat was already soaked through, but he didn't seem to notice. You don't have to walk me home, Claire said after a block, her voice low, almost swallowed by the rain. I know. Then why are you? Because you look like someone who's had enough people walk away. She turned her face slightly toward him, about to fire back something sharp, something that would keep him at a safe distance, but the look in his eyes disarmed her. There was no pity there, no polished charm, just quiet certainty. The kind of steadiness that felt dangerously close to sincerity. They walked past shuttered shops and neon lights that bled into puddles. The rain softened to a mist, brushing against her hair like cool breath. A taxi splashed by, sending a wave over Michael's shoes. He didn't flinch. You shouldn't be out here, she muttered. People like you don't take the subway. He smiled slightly. People like me forget how to walk sometimes. It's good to remember. She didn't answer. Part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. A billionaire and a nurse trudging through wet streets like a mismatched scene from a movie that couldn't decide if it was comedy or tragedy. But another part of her, the one that lived in the quiet corners of her heart, felt something else. Recognition. They reached the small park that marked the start of her neighborhood. The lamps glowed faintly through the mist, their light cutting soft halos into the night. Michael stopped near the stone steps that led down to the lower streets. This is where you turn? He asked. She nodded. A few blocks down. He looked around, scanning the narrow street, the cracked pavement, the flickering sign from the bodega on the corner. It's not exactly Midtown. It's not meant to be, she said with a trace of defiance. It's home. He nodded as if accepting a truth he didn't have the right to judge. Thank you for letting me walk you. I didn't exactly. You could have said no, he interrupted gently. But you didn't. Claire exhaled, her breath visible in the cool air. Why did you really come over to me tonight, Michael? He hesitated, then said simply, because once I sat at that same restaurant, same table, waiting for someone who never came. I remember what it felt like. She blinked. The confession was so unexpected it broke something loose inside her. And what did you do? He gave a faint, self-aware smile. Paid for 2 dinners, tipped too much, and convinced myself it didn't matter. Did it? Of course it did, he said softly. But that's the thing about pride. It's heavy, and it doesn't keep you warm. The words struck her harder than they should have. She looked away first. You talk like someone who's used to fixing things. I'm good at fixing things that break on paper, he said. People are harder. The sound of rain on the umbrella filled the pause. Somewhere a siren wailed in the distance. I should go, she said finally. You've already done enough. He lowered the umbrella slightly, stepping back so that the rain began to touch her again, cold and real. Then promise me something. What? Don't let that text be the last word tonight. She swallowed. What does that even mean? It means, he said, that one careless message doesn't decide who you are or how the night ends. The words hung between them, weightless but undeniable. Then he handed her the umbrella. She frowned. What are you doing? Take it. You'll need it more than I do. And you'll just walk back like that? He shrugged. I've weathered worse. Before she could argue, he turned and started back toward the main road, the rain quickly swallowing him whole. The glow of the streetlights stretched over his shoulders like pale gold armor. For a long time she stood watching until he disappeared around the corner, leaving only the faint rhythm of footsteps and the echo of his voice. When she finally reached her building, her clothes clung to her skin, the umbrella trembling in her grip. Her apartment was small, one window, one stove, one room that doubled as everything. She dropped her bag, set the umbrella against the wall, and collapsed onto the couch. The quiet pressed in around her, but it didn't feel as suffocating as usual. Maybe because somewhere in the city a man who didn't owe her anything had chosen not to look away. The next morning the rain had stopped, but the world hadn't changed much. The street outside buzzed with impatient cars, the radio next door hummed old love songs, and her phone lay silent on the counter. She stared at it for a long moment before switching it off and reaching for her scrubs. By nightfall, she was back under the harsh lights of the hospital, walking briskly through the corridors with her badge swinging against her chest. She pushed herself into routine. Chart, check, breathe, repeat. And then during a supply run, she turned a corner too quickly and nearly collided with a tall man in a suit surrounded by the hospital board. Sorry, she began, then froze. Michael Reed. For a split second, neither of them moved. He blinked, caught off guard, then smiled in quiet surprise. You work here? Claire's heart kicked hard. I told you I was a nurse. I thought maybe you were joking. I wasn't. Around them, people kept walking, but the air felt different, denser, charged with the weight of recognition. Michael's expression softened. I didn't come looking for you, he said, but I'm not sorry I found you. A pager beeped overhead, breaking the spell. Claire glanced at her watch, already turning. I have to go. I know, he said. Then I'll wait. And for the first time in a long time, someone actually did. When Claire finished her rounds that night, her feet felt like they had forgotten what standing still meant. The hospital's hum of machinery and muffled footsteps had settled into its usual rhythm, the strange lullaby of exhaustion and persistence. She pushed her cart back into storage, rubbed her eyes, and thought of nothing except the promise of sleep. Then she saw him. Michael sat in the corner of the hospital cafeteria, a paper cup of coffee in front of him, his jacket draped over the back of the chair. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. No one lingered here at that hour except janitors, nurses on break, and apparently billionaires who didn't know how to take a hint. She froze in the doorway, torn between disbelief and irritation. He stayed. He noticed her instantly. Of course he did. He stood but didn't approach, waiting until she came closer. When she didn't, he offered a small, careful smile. The coffee's terrible, but I thought it might taste better if it wasn't alone. You waited, she said, half accusation, half awe. He nodded, sitting again. I said I would. Her throat tightened. The simplicity of his tone, no grand gesture, no dramatics, unraveled her more than any confession could have. She crossed the room slowly, her shoes squeaking against the linoleum, and sat across from him. Do you always keep your promises? She asked. When they matter, he said. She leaned back, exhausted enough to let her defenses slip. You realize how this looks, right? She gestured at him vaguely. A man who probably doesn't even do his own grocery shopping, sitting in a hospital cafeteria at midnight. It's not normal, he chuckled. Normal is overrated. I work here, she said sharply, though her voice softened by the end. People will talk. They already do, he said evenly, but talking isn't the same as knowing. The words stilled her. For a heartbeat, she forgot how to breathe. Michael sipped the coffee, grimacing. You were right, he said. It's worse than I remember. Against her better judgment, she smiled. Just barely, but enough for him to notice. Why are you here? She asked finally. He set the cup down, folding his hands. I told you last night, I don't like watching good people walk away from kindness as if it's a debt. I'm not a good person, she said quietly. I'm a tired one. Maybe that's the same thing, he replied. Her laugh came out unsteady. That's the kind of thing people say when they've never worked a night shift in their life. He smiled but didn't argue. Instead, he studied her, really studied her. The weary grace in her posture, the strength in the way she didn't let exhaustion dull her. He saw the kind of person who didn't ask for help because she had learned not to expect it. And Claire, for her part, hated how it felt to be seen. They sat there in that odd, suspended quiet, two strangers tethered by a moment neither could explain. When she finally stood, he didn't protest. I have another hour before I'm done, she said. You should go home. I will, he said. Eventually. Michael. Claire, he interrupted gently. Let me stay. I won't get in your way. She sighed, shaking her head. You're impossible. I've been called worse. When she returned an hour later, he was still there. His head bent over his phone, unread coffee refilled beside him. For reasons she couldn't name, she didn't tell him to leave. Instead, she sat again. This time, he didn't speak first. He waited until she exhaled, shoulders relaxing just enough to make it clear she wasn't angry anymore. Why a nurse? He asked quietly. She blinked. Why not? You could have done anything else. Something easier. Safer. Her eyes flicked to the clock. The second hand moved slower now. Like it too, wanted to hear her answer. Because people break, she said softly, and someone has to know how to hold the pieces. Michael looked down at his cup, turning it between his palms. That's the best answer I've ever heard. I didn't give it for your approval. I know, he said. That's why it's real. For a long time, neither spoke. The sound of the vending machine humming behind them filled the silence. Claire's exhaustion softened into something quieter, something she couldn't quite name. Tell me something about you, she said suddenly. He looked surprised. About me? Yes, something not in the headlines. He thought for a moment. My son builds Lego skyscrapers in my office. He says he's designing the future. The image startled a laugh out of her. And what do you say? I say he's the only architect who gets to redesign my day. Claire smiled for real then. It lit her face in a way Michael hadn't seen before. You have a son, she murmured. I do, he said. He's the best part of me. Her expression shifted, something tender flickering there. He's lucky. Michael shook his head. No, I'm the lucky one. The intercom above them crackled, announcing the next shift change. Claire stood reluctantly. That's my cue. He didn't move. Will I see you again? She paused halfway to the door. You shouldn't. But will I? She hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe. He nodded once, as if that was enough. Then I'll wait. And he did. When she glanced back one last time from the end of the corridor, Michael Reed was still sitting under the flickering cafeteria light, jacket draped neatly over the chair beside him, the faintest hint of a smile on his face. As if, for once, waiting didn't feel like a waste of time. The hospital always smelled the same, sterile, tired, faintly metallic. But to Claire that morning, everything felt off. Every passing glance seemed to last a beat too long. Every whisper just quiet enough to make her suspicious. By mid-shift, she knew why. Two interns in the break room fell silent the second she walked in. One of them fumbled with her coffee cup, pretending to check her phone. The other muttered something about that billionaire guy before disappearing down the hall. Claire didn't need to ask. The hospital was a small world, and gossip moved faster than a pulse in crisis. She took her coffee black, ignoring the tremor in her hand as she sat alone. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence she refused to break. When her sister Anna called that evening, the concern in her voice wasn't subtle. Claire, is it true? Claire balanced her phone between her shoulder and ear as she wiped down the counter in her apartment. Is what true? Don't do that, Anna said sharply. People are saying you've been seen with Michael Reed. The Michael Reed. Claire froze. He came to the hospital, she admitted finally. We talked. That's all. Claire, Anna exhaled, weary and protective. You've worked too hard to get here. You don't need some billionaire's charity complicating things. These people, his people, play different games. He's not playing anything, Claire said quietly. He's kind. Kind doesn't matter when people see headlines instead of people. Claire pressed her palm to the counter, grounding herself. I'm not a headline, Anna sighed. You will be if you're not careful. Men like him? Stop! Claire's voice cut through, sharper than she meant. He's not like that. Silence stretched on the line. When Anna finally spoke again, her tone softened. I'm not saying he's bad, Claire. I'm saying his world doesn't forgive mistakes the way ours does. After the call, Claire sat on the couch, staring at the rain streaking down her window. For the first time, she wondered if maybe her sister was right. The next evening, Michael was waiting outside the hospital again. He stood under the same black umbrella, the one that had started all this. You shouldn't be here, Claire said as she stepped out, exhaustion and irritation mingling in her tone. Probably not, he said, but here I am. The streetlights cast soft halos around them, the pavement glistening with fresh drizzle. She crossed her arms. People are talking. Let them, he said. You don't understand, she countered. You get rumors. I get consequences. He took a careful step closer. Then tell me where to stand so I don't cast a shadow on you. She blinked, caught off guard. No one had ever said that to her. Not a boyfriend, not a friend, not even family. It's not that simple, she murmured. It is, he said. You decide how close I get. Her throat tightened. For a man who controlled entire industries, he made surrender sound easy. That terrified her more than anything. She turned away, hugging her arms against the wind. You think you can fix this with words, but you can't. You don't know what it's like to work for everything, to have people judge you before you even open your mouth. He was silent for a moment, rain collecting on his hair and shoulders. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but low. You're right. I was born with advantages most people never get, but I've also lost things money couldn't buy, and no one believed me when I said it hurt. We're not as different as you think. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, but the sincerity in his tone stopped her. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the sound of rain between them. Michael, she said finally, you don't owe me anything. I know, he replied, but that's not why I'm here. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw something she hadn't expected. Not pity, not desire, recognition. And that scared her enough to whisper, don't come back tomorrow. He hesitated, then nodded. If that's what you want. She didn't answer. That night, she found a folded piece of paper on the cafeteria table where he had sat before. His handwriting was precise, each letter deliberate. The world may watch, but only you decide how you're remembered. She traced the words with her fingertips, her breath catching. Over the next few days, his absence felt heavier than his presence ever had. But the rumors didn't fade. They grew, twisting, multiplying, filling spaces she couldn't control. Some whispered she was his mistress. Others said she'd used her job to climb into his orbit. Dr. Ellison called her into his office by the end of the week. Claire, he said, hands folded, tone tight with discomfort, there's concern among the staff. You understand how these things can appear. I didn't do anything wrong, she said firmly. I know, he said, but appearances matter. Patients talk, reporters ask questions. We can't afford scandal. Her chest constricted. Scandal? For what? Having dinner with someone who treated me like a person? Ellison's expression softened. You're good at your job, Claire. Don't give anyone a reason to forget that. She left before she broke. Outside, she leaned against the cool wall of the corridor, closing her eyes. Her hands trembled, her pulse hammering in her throat. For so long, she'd fought to be invisible, hard-working, dependable, unnoticed. And now, because one man had seen her, she was paying the price. When she finally stepped into the rain again that night, she half expected Michael to be there, waiting like always. He wasn't, and somehow that hurt even more. The morning it happened, Claire didn't even check her phone at first. She brewed her usual bitter coffee, tied her hair into the same tight bun, and tried to ignore the unease that had followed her since Michael stopped showing up. The quiet felt wrong, like a door left open in a storm. But then her phone buzzed again and again, a vibration that wouldn't stop. Messages. Dozens. Her friend Sasha from the night shift. "Are you okay?" A coworker. "I can't believe they printed that. Don't come in yet." And finally, Anna. "Claire, don't read the article. Promise me you won't." Claire's hand trembled as she opened the link anyway. The headline hit her like a slap. "Mystery nurse spotted with billionaire Michael Reed. Hospital angel or gold digger?" Beneath it were photos. Grainy, stolen, intimate in their stillness. Her leaving the hospital in her scrubs. Michael's umbrella tilted toward her. A blurry frame of her looking up at him under a streetlight. The comments were worse. "She's playing him. He's rescuing another charity case. Typical nurse fantasy." Her stomach lurched. She didn't even remember how she got to the bathroom before she was sick. When she finally looked up, pale and shaking, her reflection in the mirror didn't look like her anymore. It looked like the version the world had invented. By the time she reached the hospital, whispers followed her down every hallway. Eyes trailed her like she carried contagion. One patient refused her care outright, muttering something about gold-digging nurses. Claire didn't argue. She just handed the chart to another nurse and walked out before she shattered. Dr. Ellison found her in the locker room later, sitting on the bench, her face blank. "Claire," he said carefully, closing the door behind him. "You've seen the news?" She nodded once. "They're calling the board," he continued. "Public Relations wants to issue a statement distancing the hospital from any personal association you might have with Mr. Reed." She swallowed. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know that," he said softly, "but perception can be louder than truth." Her laugh was bitter. "So I'm being punished for being seen?" "You're being caught in someone else's storm," Ellison said, sympathy creeping into his tone. "Take a few days off, Claire. Let it blow over." "Blow over?" she repeated, her voice cracking. "They've turned me into a story." He didn't answer. When she walked out of the hospital, reporters were waiting. Flashbulbs exploded in her face. "Miss Morgan, did you use your position to get close to Michael Reed? Are you in a relationship? Is it true you're under investigation?" She didn't answer a single question. She just kept walking until she turned the corner, her breath short, her chest tight, and that was when she saw him. Michael stood by his car, expression grave, tie loose, rain streaking across his shoulders. The world around them blurred into static noise. "I'm so sorry," he said immediately. "I didn't know they'd—" "You didn't know?" Her voice rose before she could stop it. "You live in that world, Michael. Cameras, headlines, PR. I don't. I can't survive it." "I tried to stop them," he said, stepping closer. "But the photos weren't mine to bury. The story's already everywhere." She shook her head, fury and heartbreak mixing until she could barely speak. "They're tearing my life apart. My patients don't trust me. My job, my only job, is on the line. And for what? Because you decided to be kind?" He took a slow breath. "No, because I decided not to look away." "Then maybe you should have," she snapped. Rain began to fall again, cold and heavy. She turned to leave, but he reached into his coat and handed her a folded page, soaked around the edges. "I wrote something," he said. "It's not an apology. It's a truth." She didn't take it. "Claire," he said softer now, "you don't have to stand alone in this." "I've stood alone my whole life," she whispered, "and right now that's the only thing keeping me upright." He looked at her for a long time, rain dripping from his hair, his hands still extended. "You think this is about saving you. It's not. It's about standing beside you." Her fingers trembled as she finally took the paper. She didn't open it until she was home, curled on her couch with the sound of rain against the window. The words were written in his steady hand. "She is not my scandal. She is my equal." Below it, smaller. "If you speak, I'll stand beside you. If you don't, I'll stay silent with you." Tears blurred the ink. The next morning, Claire went back to the hospital, not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear couldn't feed her or pay rent. Reporters had moved on to another headline. Her co-workers still whispered, but more quietly now. When she entered the children's ward, one of the younger patients, a girl with leukemia who never missed anything, smiled and said, "You were on TV." Claire forced a small grin. "That sounds scary." The girl shook her head. "You looked brave." That night, as Claire walked out of the hospital, she unfolded Michael's note again, reading it under the streetlight. For the first time, the words didn't feel like protection. They felt like a challenge. Maybe she couldn't control what the world thought, but she could decide what came next. She tucked the note into her coat pocket and looked toward the city skyline glowing in the mist. Somewhere out there, Michael Reed was fighting his own battle for her. Tomorrow she would fight hers. The next morning began with silence. Too heavy, too deliberate. No messages, no calls, not even the usual email reminders from the hospital. Claire sat on her bed, staring at the folded note Michael had written, the ink now smudged from where her thumb had pressed against it all night. She had read the words so many times she could have recited them in her sleep. "She is not my scandal. She is my equal." It didn't sound like something written for public relations. It sounded like truth. And truth, she was beginning to realize, had a cost. By noon, that cost arrived. A hospital-wide memo went out, thinly veiled in professionalism, but she saw what it meant. All staff are reminded to maintain professional boundaries with donors and affiliates to protect the hospital's integrity. Her phone vibrated seconds later. "Anna, I told you," her sister said before she even said hello. "They're trying to make you disappear quietly. You have to get ahead of this." "Anna, no, listen," Anna insisted. "You have two options. You can keep hiding and let them rewrite the story, or you can tell your version before they bury you under theirs." Claire rubbed her temples. "You think anyone would believe me over him?" "Maybe not," Anna said softly. "But if he really means what he wrote, he'll make them listen." That afternoon, Claire clocked in anyway. Her badge beeped at the entrance like a defiant heartbeat. She wasn't ready to be erased yet. When she entered the children's ward, the nurses fell silent. Dr. Ellison looked up from his clipboard, an expression somewhere between worry and warning. "Claire, can we talk in my office?" She followed him, already bracing for what was coming. He closed the door gently. "The board has been reviewing your case," he began. "There's pressure from donors and—" "Donors," she interrupted bitterly, "meaning Michael Reed." Ellison hesitated. "He's one of them, yes, but the others are concerned. The optics are bad." "Optics," she repeated, the word like acid. "You're talking about my job like it's a reflection, not a life." "I'm trying to protect you," he said softly. "Take unpaid leave, a few weeks. Let it die down. And if it doesn't, then we'll revisit." She laughed once without humor. "You mean replace?" He didn't deny it. She left before he could say anything else. By the time she reached the courtyard, her hands were shaking. The cold air hit her lungs like glass. She wanted to scream, to fight, but all she could do was stand there, the sky gray and low above her. Then a familiar voice behind her. "You shouldn't be fighting this alone." She turned. Michael stood at the gate, his expression calm but his eyes dark with worry. "You shouldn't be here," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. He stepped closer. "The hospital won't listen to you," he said, "but they'll listen to me." "Then what?" she asked. "You'll issue another statement? Fix my life with a press release?" He shook his head. "No, we'll tell the truth. Together." The word together hit her like a pulse. "You think standing next to me makes things better?" she said. "You don't understand, Michael. Every step you take closer, the more they think I belong to you." He met her gaze steadily. "Then we show them you belong to no one." Her breath caught. "I've seen how the world treats people who can't fight back," he continued. "But you're not helpless, Claire. You just haven't had anyone stand beside you long enough to prove it." She wanted to argue, but deep down, she knew he was right. "What are you planning?" she asked warily. "A press conference," he said. "Tomorrow morning, at the hospital. No PR filters, no teleprompters. Just honesty." She stared at him. You'll destroy your own reputation. He smiled faintly. It survived worse things than the truth. She looked away, torn between pride and exhaustion. I don't want your pity. And you don't have it, he said. You have my respect. The words were simple, but they cracked something inside her that had been holding on too tightly. The next morning, the courtyard was filled with cameras, reporters, and curious staff lingering near windows. Claire stood just behind Michael, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Michael stepped up to the microphone. I won't take questions today, he began, his voice firm, clear. I came to speak about someone the press decided to turn into a headline. Her name is Claire Morgan. She's a nurse. She's not a scandal. She's a person who does more good in one shift than most of us do in a lifetime. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked. She didn't ask for this attention, he continued. She didn't deserve it, and she shouldn't lose her livelihood because of my name. He paused then, glancing back at her. I said before that she was my equal. I meant it, but today she's the brave one. Every word seemed to steal the air from her lungs. When he stepped aside, the crowd turned toward her. She hadn't planned to speak, but silence, she realized, would let them win. She stepped up, heart hammering. I don't have the kind of power Mr. Reed has, she began, her voice shaking but clear. All I have is my work, my name. And both were taken from me because people decided kindness had an agenda. She met the cameras head on. I'm not ashamed of being seen with someone who treated me with respect. What I am ashamed of is how quickly we believe lies when they sound more interesting than the truth. The courtyard went quiet. Not a flash, not a cough, just stillness. Then a single clap broke the silence. Anna standing at the back of the crowd, tears shining in her eyes. Others joined in, a few nurses, then staff, then strangers. Claire stepped away from the microphone, her hands trembling. Michael met her halfway. You just changed the ending, he said softly. She smiled faintly. Maybe just the chapter. They stood there side by side as the rain began again, soft, steady, and cleansing. The story didn't disappear overnight. Scandals never really die. They just sink deeper, waiting for quieter hearts to bury them. But the next morning, when Claire stepped into the hospital lobby, something had changed. No one whispered. No one stared. A few even smiled. The front desk nurse, who had avoided her all week, offered a hesitant nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even understanding. It was respect. Good to have you back, Claire, someone called from down the hall. For the first time in days, her chest didn't ache. The press conference had rippled through the city like a stone tossed into deep water. Some papers called it a stunt. Others called it courage. The hospital board issued a statement reaffirming their support for staff integrity, which was bureaucratic language for, we can't fire her now. And yet the truest shift wasn't public. It was private. Michael had kept his distance since that day. True to his word, he hadn't tried to rescue her again. He let her work. He let her breathe. But she could feel him everywhere. The air in the cafeteria at night, the faint scent of his cologne in the corridor near administration. That evening, as she was finishing her shift, a small voice tugged her sleeve. Miss Claire? She turned to see Lily, the leukemia patient with the perpetually messy pigtails. The little girl held out a sheet of construction paper, a messy crayon drawing of a woman in blue scrubs holding an umbrella beside a tall man in a suit. That's you and your friend, Lily said proudly. The one who makes you smile. Claire crouched down, her throat tightening. You drew this? Lily nodded. My mom said people were mean to you, but I told her nice people always win at the end. Claire laughed softly, blinking fast to hide her tears. You might be onto something, kiddo. When she left that night, she found Michael waiting by the hospital gate, hands in his pockets, the same battered umbrella hooked over his arm. Old habits die hard, he said with a small smile. She stopped a few feet away, unsure how to start. The air between them was lighter now, but still thick with everything unspoken. You shouldn't be here, she said, though her tone lacked conviction. Probably not. You promised to let me work. I did, he said. I'm not here to interfere. Just to walk. The street was quiet except for the hum of traffic. Claire sighed, then nodded. Fine, but no umbrella this time. He smiled. Deal. They fell into step along the wet pavement. The city glowed under 1,000 small reflections. Puddles mirroring light like broken glass turned beautiful. I read the headlines, he said finally. They've started calling you the nurse who stood up. She groaned. That sounds like the worst superhero ever. I think it fits, he said. You did what most people wouldn't. She glanced at him. And you helped. I just opened the door. You walked through it. They stopped at a crosswalk, the red light washing over their faces. Claire studied him in the glow. He looked tired, the kind of tired that came from holding the world together with both hands for too long. Was it worth it? She asked quietly. For you? He smiled faintly. Every second. Her heart stuttered. You didn't have to do that, Michael. You could have stayed silent and protected yourself. I tried silence once, he said. It cost me everything that mattered. She wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his tone told her not to. Instead, she said softly, You can't keep standing in the rain for everyone. I only stand for the ones who make it mean something. The light turned green, but neither of them moved. They just stood there, two souls suspended in a moment that didn't need permission. When they finally reached her street, Claire stopped. You can't keep showing up for me, she said, her voice gentler now. I have to be able to stand alone. You already are, he said, but even strong people deserve to have someone beside them sometimes. She looked away, fighting a smile that wanted to surface. You sound like one of those motivational posters. He grinned. Then I've officially hit a new low. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was soft, familiar, like the silence after a storm, when everything still drips, but the worst is over. I brought something, he said suddenly, reaching into his coat. He handed her a folded piece of paper. She frowned. If this is another press statement, it's not. She unfolded it. Inside was a letter addressed to the hospital board, signed by him. It was short, formal, and unflinchingly clear. Reed Foundation to donate funding for pediatric equipment on the condition that Nurse Claire Morgan be reinstated to full duties with public commendation. Her mouth fell open. You bribed them? I prefer the term leveraged goodwill, he said, smirking. Michael. They were going to do it anyway, he said. I just sped up their conscience. She shook her head, torn between frustration and reluctant gratitude. You're impossible. I've been told. She folded the letter carefully. You didn't have to do this. I know, he said, but sometimes the right thing needs a push. For a long time, neither spoke. The rain had stopped, but the smell of it still hung in the air. Claire looked up at him, at the man who had somehow turned her entire world inside out and still managed to make it feel like it was hers. Thank you, she said softly. He nodded. You don't owe me anything. I know, she said. That's why I mean it. When he left that night, she watched him go until he disappeared around the corner. The next morning, she arrived at the hospital to find her name on the bulletin board under the headline, Employee Recognition, Nurse Morgan, Exemplary Service and Professional Conduct. Someone had pinned a single flower beside it. She didn't know who, but she smiled anyway. Outside her window, the city gleamed under a clear sky, and for the first time in months, she felt something she hadn't dared to in a long time. Hope. The city didn't roar anymore. It hummed quieter, like it was finally catching its breath. The storm had passed, and Claire had survived it. Days fell into rhythm again. The hospital was busy, noisy, alive. Her patients smiled when they saw her. The staff treated her like she'd never been a headline, and for the first time in months, her name didn't come with a question mark. And yet, under all that calm, she felt it, an ache she didn't know how to name. Michael hadn't visited in a week. Not a call, not a text, not a note tucked under her locker. The silence should have been relief, a chance to rebuild her life without his shadow beside it. But it wasn't. It was hollow. She told herself he was just busy, a man with a company to run, a son to raise, a reputation to mend. Still, she caught herself glancing at the hospital doors at the end of every shift, half expecting that battered black umbrella to appear again. On the 7th day, it did. The cafeteria was almost empty when she saw him through the glass doors, standing at the counter, sleeves rolled up, ordering coffee he wouldn't drink. For a second, she thought she might cry. Instead, she walked over slowly, pretending she wasn't surprised. Back to terrible coffee again? He turned, that familiar, quiet smile flickering across his face. I missed it. You missed the caffeine or the punishment? Maybe both, he said, and for the first time in weeks, she laughed. A real, unguarded laugh. He took his cup and gestured to the table by the window. They sat. The same seats, the same hum of machines, the same thin light spilling in from the parking lot. Everything felt eerily familiar. I heard about the recognition, he said. Congratulations. She shrugged, but the smile gave her away. You had a hand in that. I just moved a few obstacles. You did the rest. They fell into silence again, but this one wasn't uncomfortable. It was steady, like two people standing on ground they'd both helped level. Finally, she said quietly, Why'd you stop coming? He looked down at his cup. You asked me to let you stand on your own. I thought I should give you space to do it. And did you? He smiled faintly. You did just fine without me. I didn't say I wanted to, she admitted before she could stop herself. He looked up then, eyes softening in a way that made her heart stumble. Claire, don't, she said quickly, shaking her head. Don't make this harder. I got used to you being around, and when you weren't, it felt strange. He nodded slowly. Strange can be good. It means it mattered. She met his gaze. You really believe that? I believe the best things are the ones that don't fit neatly into our plans. She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing. You talk like a man who's made peace with chaos. Maybe I just learned that control is a myth, he said. Sometimes you stop steering and realize the road's better without your hands on the wheel. They sat there talking until the lights dimmed for closing. The world outside had gone quiet, snow beginning to fall in thin, hesitant flakes. When they finally stood to leave, Michael paused by the door. Can I show you something? She frowned. Now? He smiled. Now. They walked out into the cold, the wind curling around them like a whisper. He led her around the corner to the new wing of the hospital, still under construction, scaffolding silhouetted against the dark sky. The snow caught the work lights, turning everything into silver dust. What is this? She asked softly. The pediatric unit, he said. It's nearly done. We named the main room after one of the kids you treated. Lily. Claire froze, blinking back tears. Lily? She told me you were her favorite, he said quietly. Said you made her feel brave when she was scared. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Michael, I don't know what to say. Don't, he said. Just look. Through the glass wall, she could see it. A small painted mural on the far side of the new ward. Two figures under a black umbrella. A nurse and a man in a suit, holding it between them as a child reached for their hands. Her throat closed. You didn't. She insisted, he said, smiling. Said every room needs a story. The wind bit at her cheeks, but she barely felt it. You shouldn't have done that. I know, but I love it, she whispered. They stood there in silence, watching the snow blur the lights of the city beyond the hospital. After a long pause, she said, You're not staying, are you? He exhaled, breath visible in the cold. I have to fly out tomorrow. A merger in London. Could be weeks. She nodded, trying to ignore the sudden hollowness spreading in her chest. So this is goodbye. For now, he said, but I'm coming back. There's more work to finish here. She tilted her head. The hospital? He looked at her with that same quiet sincerity that had disarmed her from the very beginning. No, you. Something inside her cracked open then. Not the brittle kind of break that hurts, but the kind that lets light through. She didn't kiss him. They weren't there yet. But when he reached out and brushed his thumb against her knuckles, she didn't pull away either. The snow fell harder, softening the world around them, wrapping their unfinished story in a silence that felt almost sacred. And for the first time, Claire didn't care who was watching. Snow muffled the city, softening even its sharpest corners. The world looked gentler and white, but Claire knew better. Peace was never permanent. It was borrowed time, fragile as the flakes landing on her coat as she walked to work that morning. Michael had been gone for 2 weeks, 2 long, unremarkable weeks. He'd kept his promise to write, Short texts and late-night emails that sounded like conversations they might have had if time zones didn't exist. "Don't forget to rest," one said. Another simply, "I miss coffee that tastes like cardboard." She smiled when she read them, then frowned at herself for smiling. The hospital, meanwhile, thrummed back to life. The new pediatric wing was nearly complete, the mural already finished. Patients, her patients, would soon move in. Claire threw herself into the work, every shift a small rebellion against exhaustion, fear, and the echo of his absence. But some absences made themselves known even in motion. Late one night, as she was checking vitals and recovery, Dr. Ellison approached. He looked tired, his usual poise dulled. "You should sit for a moment," he said quietly. "I'm fine," Claire replied, adjusting a monitor. He hesitated. "That's not what I meant. It's about the Reed Foundation." Her hands stilled. "What about it?" "The merger in London. Michael's company. It's turned into something larger than expected. There's talk in the boardroom. He's been unavailable." "Unavailable how?" "Press says he collapsed during negotiations. Stress, exhaustion. They're keeping it quiet." The words hung between them, brittle as ice. Claire swallowed hard. "Is he?" Ellison shook his head. "I don't know, but it seems serious." She finished her shift on autopilot. Her hands worked, her mouth gave orders, her mind did the math of survival, but her heart wasn't there. It was in another city, pacing sterile corridors that looked just like these, wondering if he was awake, if anyone was bringing him terrible coffee to make him smile. By dawn, she was at the airport. The flight to London was long and sleepless. She told herself she was being reckless, that he might not want her there, that it wasn't her place. But the moment she stepped into the hospital lobby where his name appeared on every donor plaque, doubt dissolved. "Michael Reed," she told the receptionist, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm here to see him." The nurse at the desk frowned. "Family only." Claire hesitated, then said quietly, "Tell him the nurse with the umbrella came." The nurse blinked, confused, but nodded. Minutes later, Claire was being ushered down a hall of glass and steel until she reached a private room. Michael sat propped up against the bed, a monitor beeping softly beside him. He was pale, thinner, but his eyes, those patient, infuriating eyes, lit when he saw her. "Claire," he breathed. "You crossed an ocean." She exhaled, relief and anger spilling out at once. "You scared me." He smiled faintly. "Didn't mean to." She took the chair beside his bed, her fingers tightening around the armrest. "You should have called. I didn't want you to worry." "That's not how this works," she said, voice trembling. "You don't get to just vanish. You don't get to protect me by disappearing." He looked down, guilt flickering across his face. "I didn't think you'd come." "I didn't think I would either," she admitted. "But then I remembered the last thing you said." He frowned. "What was that?" "That you'd be back to finish something. And I realized if you didn't, I'd never forgive myself for letting you break that promise." His expression softened. "You really came all this way to keep me honest?" "Yes," she said quietly. "And maybe a little because I missed you." He chuckled weakly. "That's dangerous information to give a man in a hospital gown." "Don't make me regret it." They sat in silence after that, the kind that held more comfort than words. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat filled the room. "Doctors say I'll be fine," he said eventually. "Stress, dehydration, the usual punishment for thinking I'm indestructible." "You're lucky then." "I am," he said, meeting her gaze, "especially right now." She rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. "You always know what to say." "Only when it's true." For the first time, she let herself take his hand. It felt cold, fragile, human, so unlike the man the world saw. "I thought I'd lost everything," he said quietly. "The merger, the board, the control I spent years pretending I didn't care about. But then you showed up, and suddenly losing didn't feel like the worst thing that could happen." She squeezed his hand. "Don't you dare make that sound romantic." He smiled, eyes half closed. Too late. When he drifted to sleep, she stayed. The hours slipped by unnoticed, her hand never leaving his. Outside, London's snow turned to rain, streaking the window like a memory trying to stay alive. By morning, he was stronger. When the nurse came to check his vitals, Claire stood to leave. "You can't vanish again." he murmured as she adjusted his blanket. She met his eyes. Then get better. Come home. He nodded. You'll be there? Only if you promise to listen when I say rest. Deal, he said, his voice faint but sure. She turned to go, then paused at the door. Michael? Yes? I kept your umbrella, she said, smiling. And it still leaks. He laughed softly, the sound rough but real. Good. Means it's still ours. When she stepped outside, the morning light broke through the clouds for the first time in days. The city glistened, washed clean. And for the first time since he left, she didn't feel like she was walking alone. Spring came slowly that year, as if the world itself was cautious about beginning again. The snow melted in small surrenders. The air smelled faintly of rain and thawed earth. And for the first time in months, sunlight reached the hospital courtyard. Claire stood by the new pediatric wing, her hands tucked in the pockets of her scrubs. The glass walls gleamed in the afternoon light, and beyond them, children laughed, tiny bright sounds that filled every corner of the new space. The mural she'd once seen through scaffolding was finished now, its colors warmer, the umbrella larger, stretching wide over the nurse, the man and the small child between them. She still couldn't look at it without smiling. Careful, Dr. Ellison said behind her. You'll make people think you're happy to be here. Claire glanced over her shoulder. I am. He studied her for a moment. You know, not everyone comes back from what you went through. I didn't come back, she said softly. I just decided not to leave. He chuckled. Remind me never to underestimate you again. When he walked away, she lingered, watching sunlight spill across the polished floors. It still felt strange to see her name engraved on a small plaque by the doorway. Nurse Claire Morgan. In recognition of compassion beyond duty. She hadn't known Michael planned it until the day before it went up. Michael. He'd returned from London a month ago, healed but changed. Not weaker, just quieter. Less like the man who had carried the world on his back, and more like someone who'd finally learned to set it down. They'd spoken every day since his return, sometimes in person, sometimes by phone. Never about what they were to each other, just about what was next. And yet she could feel it between them, a promise still unwritten, waiting. The sound of footsteps pulled her back to the present. She turned, and there he was. Michael stood by the courtyard archway, dressed simply for once. Dark sweater, no tie, no entourage. Just him. In his hand, the familiar, weather-beaten umbrella leaned against his shoulder like an old friend refusing to be replaced. Didn't expect you to actually come, she said, smiling. Would have been rude to miss the grand opening of the Claire Morgan Pavilion, he said lightly, though I think Reed Foundation Wing would have sounded more expensive. She rolled her eyes. You'd ruin it with a logo. He grinned, and for a moment everything between them felt effortless again. You did this, he said, looking at the building. Not me, not the board. You turned a scandal into something good. She shrugged, pretending not to feel the pride warming her chest. You helped. I nudged, he said. You built. They walked together along the edge of the courtyard, where tulips had started to push through the soil. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of things they didn't need to say out loud anymore. After a while, Claire stopped near the fountain. You look better, she said. He laughed softly. Translation, I don't look like a man who almost died of paperwork. Something like that. His expression sobered. You shouldn't have come to London. It was dangerous, reckless. And exactly what you would have done for me, she interrupted. Don't pretend otherwise. He looked at her then, really looked, as if memorizing the way she stood against the light. You scare me sometimes. Good, she said with a small smile. Keeps you honest. The wind caught her hair, tossing a few strands across her face. He reached out, brushing them aside with a gesture so gentle it felt accidental. But it wasn't. It was deliberate, and it made her heart stumble. I don't think I've ever met anyone like you, he said quietly. That's because I don't exist in your world, she said. Then maybe it's time I stopped living in one that doesn't deserve you, he replied. Her breath caught. Michael, he held up a hand, half smiling. No promises, no headlines, just honesty. You changed my life, Claire. You reminded me that being seen isn't the same as being known. She blinked away sudden tears. You did the same for me. For a long moment, neither spoke. Around them, the children's laughter carried through the open windows, mixing with the hum of new beginnings. Do you ever regret it? She asked softly. Everything that happened? He shook his head. Not a second of it. If I could do it again, I'd still walk over to that table. Her throat tightened. Even knowing it would nearly ruin us both? Especially then, he said, because that night gave me something I didn't know I needed. Something real. He handed her the umbrella then, its handle still worn smooth where his fingers had held it so many times. I think it's yours now, he said. She took it carefully, her smile trembling. It still leaks, you know? I know, he said, eyes bright, but it's weathered worse. They stood under the first light rain of spring, neither of them moving to open it. The drops were warm, playful, nothing like the storms that had once nearly drowned them. After a long moment, Claire whispered, You could come back here sometimes, not as a donor, just for coffee. I'd like that, he said, as long as it's terrible coffee. It's still terrible, she said, laughing. Some things never change. He smiled, looking down at her. And some things do. The rain thickened, catching the sunlight until it looked like gold falling from the sky. Claire opened the umbrella halfway, not enough to hide beneath, just enough to share. Michael stepped closer, close enough for her to feel the warmth of him, the steadiness that had drawn her in from the start. This time, she didn't step back, and when he reached for her hand, she didn't let go. Above them, the old umbrella shivered against the rain, holding steady. Below it, two people stood not as rescuer and rescued, not as rumor or redemption, but as something simpler and stronger. Two equals who had found each other in the wreckage and decided to stay. The rain fell harder, but neither of them noticed.